Messy and masterful. In this podcast, we speak about the success of people who have achieved, built, or done something amazing, special, remarkable, noteworthy, and/or fabulous. Think of presidents, doctors, chefs, architects, filmmakers, writers, philosophers, CEOs, journalists, and the list goes on and on of people who've had a genuine impact on this world. But rather than underlining their career victories, we speak about the challenges they needed to overcome to actually get there. In each episode, we discuss 3 of such challenges, obstacles, difficulties, and/or hurdles with our guest, putting the messy of their lives next to the masterful. A very warm welcome to you. My name is Alder Bab, and I'm so happy you could make it. So sit back, relax, and download the podcast here.
I became very interested in ways of representing credit that, address issues of bias and the way in which, I'd heard from so many women that they felt like are just formal systems of attribution and credit were preventing them from being recognized for what they'd actually done.
A very good day, everyone. So happy you could make it for yet another episode of Messy and Masterful. And boy, oh boy, do we have a great guest today. We will be talking to Dr. Amy Brandt. And Amy is an American academic and the executive producer of the Emmy-nominated documentary Picture a Scientist. Currently, Amy is the director of MIT Press, which is quite a job. And Amy is also a cognitive scientist by training. Now, we spoke to Amy about her lifelong career in and for academia. We spoke about why there's still a lot of work to be done to get more women into science, technology, engineering, and medicine, STEM as an abbreviation. But we also dove into how sounds and syllables and words work for us all in the teaching and learning process. So I think an overall intriguing conversation with a wonderful person. I hope you will enjoy episode 63, Dr. Amy Brandt, the academic. The director of MIT Press, Dr. Amy Brandt. Amy, a very warm welcome to you.
I'm so delighted to see you again after all these years, Aldo, and delighted to be here.
Yeah, I was very happy you said yes, very enthusiastically, very quickly after I sent the invite. You've been on my list for a very long time. I've been following you from a distance. Full disclosure, at some point somewhere we were colleagues, and I won't bore the audience too much with what we did back then in digital science. Instead, I would like to build a bridge to the exciting work that you do currently, Amy. And of course, we're going to discuss your challenges, your personal as well as your career challenges throughout. First of all, for people who do not know you, I deem you to be an academic in the purest sense of the word. So someone who really devoted her career to academia on both sides of the aisle, almost, I would say. And I would like to start, and when I read up about your extensive career, I found about, the work that you did in cognitive science. And I would like to start there. Could you explain for people who are not so familiar with this, what exactly is cognitive science?
Sure. So cognitive science is the study of our cognitive processes, whether it's memory or vision, decision-making, language, and my area of interest has always been on language. Since I was a little kid and learned how to read and loved literature and loved reading, I became very interested in the nature of just sentences themselves. And so when I was in college, I studied linguistics, was very interested in how we understand the structure of language. And that's in part what led me to go to MIT and get my PhD in cognitive science, where I was studying how children learn languages in different parts of the world and different languages and what really the universal principles are. So that is a concept that comes from really Noam Chomsky and his analysis of human language, its roots in the brain, and what the commonalities are among all languages in the world. So for me in particular, I was looking for what are the common patterns that we see in very, very young children learning different languages?
So it was around early learning or early
Yes.
understanding. And I know, if it's PhD material, it might be far too complex to explain it in a kind of a 40-minute interview. But could you share some conclusions or some things that you found?
Sure. In particular, I was interested in something that we see in some Romance languages of kind of the optional subject. So, in English, you'll say, he goes to the store. In some Romance languages, you can just say goes to the store, and that's entirely grammatical. And I wanted to see, looking at languages where subject drop was permissible and ones where it wasn't, what the patterns were very early on, and looking for really kind of universal patterns around this kind of optionality. So it does get pretty nerdy pretty quickly, kind of looking at that. But, my dissertation and later articles that came out of it, were published, were very impactful, still highly cited. So it led to, what you want to see in academic research is that your work sparks other work, and it's a basis for other people to go on and do deeper research. And I certainly felt that it did that. But I ultimately, after a few years in an academic position post-PhD, decided to move into publishing because I was very interested in kind of the larger questions and how fields of research and how debates get shaped. And so I had made that jump. But you're right. I mean, all along, even as I've worked in these different fields, whether it was pure research or publishing or research technology or, academic administration, and I could talk about some of the work I did at Harvard, I've stayed in the academic world.
Yeah. I think that's fascinating. And I always try to kind of spot the red thread and kind of, see what drives and motivates people. One of the things that came to mind is accessibility. So whether it's language, whether it's knowledge, would it be correct for me to say that you've devoted your career in making knowledge accessible to everyone so that it can be understood by as many people as possible?
Yes, I think that is fair to say. I think for me, thinking about it, I've written about this a lot. And, I turned 60 this year. And so I look back on sort of the path, the kind of winding road that I've taken in many ways. And that is definitely one of the themes that I see. I have been very, very focused on, once we started moving research publishing kind of across, all of the disciplines, across the arts and sciences, once we started moving it online in the late 90s, the issues that have concerned me are what is blocking the kind of access to that digitally accessible knowledge and the ways in which I could help remove some of those blockers in very, very different ways. There was kind of the early work, which is still so important at Crossref, right? Yeah, and I don't know if your listeners will be interested in that, but just this idea that if you're, say, reading a journal, by one publisher and it links through the citations to a journal by another publisher, you should be able to just click a button and get to that, that other publisher's article. And just very, very basic things like that, building that kind of infrastructure is extremely important. And then, more recently, just what are the economics of continuing to publish high quality work in a way that is maximally accessible to people around the world, which is a lot of what I do now.
That's fascinating and a lot to unravel. I want to say a couple of things. You do not look 60. Let's start there. And congrats.
Thank you.
60 must be a big year. Was it for you really a moment to look back on everything that you've done at that age?
I think it was. I mean, this will get a little personal. The pandemic was tough for me. I lost both of my parents. My father died of COVID. My young adult, it happened to so many of us, right? And my young adult kids came home, and that was the most wonderful thing, we lived together again. And so coming out of the pandemic, turning 60, I think it wasn't just the number, it wasn't just the age, it was kind of a moment in time where, yes, I'm thinking about, I think a lot of people in the world right now, their sense of how do they weight, planning for the long term versus planning for the short term, right? I mean, we're all in that mode. So
yeah, it was for everyone kind of a reset, right? Like, what is
yes,
important in life? What do we want?
exactly.
And
Yeah.
how are
What
we going to
really,
achieve it?
yeah,
Yeah,
what matters.
yeah. Nice. But I think your findings were you all were already doing lots of stuff that mattered, I can imagine. And then as your ally, MIT, because for me, when I think MIT, I think, very advanced robotics, kind of, very far away, highly technical stuff that is going to hit mainstream in like, 20 years, but not immediately. But when we talk accessibility of learning and content and whatever, that sounds something more in
Mm.
proximity of everyone. Is that a little bit of a misunderstanding around
I
MIT, or
no, I don't think
how should I
so.
see that?
I love that you raised that question. It's so timely because you can imagine, I mean, right now in this moment in Cambridge, Massachusetts, all anybody is talking about is generative AI. Any conversation is about what large language models and artificial intelligence, how they're going to impact healthcare, how it's going to impact the economy, how it's going to impact academia, how it's going to impact human life and life on Earth. But the really interesting thing that I think many people, in academia, but on the technical side, so certainly at MIT, have come to see is that so much of the very, very fast advances that we're seeing are happening outside of the university, right? Because if you look at what universities, at least in this country, and I think it's probably true elsewhere too, are optimized for, what purposes they serve, what they're good at, what the incentives are around, producing new research and finding solutions to problems in the world. In many ways, adjacent entities, whether it's corporate laboratories or, other organizations, have been faster and more efficient. And that's where we have seen, I mean, the basis for large language models and generative AI go back many, many years and do have their roots in the academy. But, the explosion that we've seen recently is coming from outside the academy. So,
And
yeah.
how do you synergize? How do you synergize what you see outside? How do you bring that in? Like, I know you're kind of highlighting a little bit, but kind of trying to bring it together, specifically as a publisher, right? Because you're the director
Yeah.
of MIT Press. Where do you see these efforts coming together?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'll go back again to the sort of higher level university and then come back to what I do in particular. MIT was always at the forefront of this, but we see it at many other universities now. Very, very important public-private, academic, corporate partnerships, right? And so the cross-pollination between, Google and Microsoft and MIT has just grown, right? Google just built this huge office building or rebuilt right next to our campus. And there are many people in our computer science department that split their time between the two, right? And interestingly enough, and I mentioned Google because as we have been pushing at the MIT Press to publish more and more of our content open access, Google is helping to support us publish our cutting edge work in computer science and AI and machine learning open access. They're helping fund that. And
That's amazing.
It is
Yeah.
amazing. And
Yeah.
I don't think that I would have anticipated that just a few years ago. That,
Yeah.
I mean, all of publishing is in a bit of a tailspin right now because at first we thought, oh, it's just, pandemic economics, supply chain, inflation, recession, what have you. But now what we're seeing, in fact, is that given the economies of attention, that people's reading behavior has really changed. And so if you're trying to run a sustainable business on the basis of publishing books or publishing books in journals, it's extremely challenging. And add for us the added challenge that actually we see our mission is to publish as much of that content open in digital form, the academic content,
Yeah.
not the trade books, if you will,
Yeah.
for general readers. It's leading to forming a whole host of new partnerships.
Again, so many things to unravel. One of the things that you said, and I want to dive into that immediately, is kind of when you said attention behavior. I
Yeah.
cannot talk to a cognitive scientist and not talk about what you just said, that our attention has changed. And specifically for someone who deals with such advanced formats of content, because let's be honest, the content of MIT Press, it's not mainstream content. It's for an academic audience. It's like very specific peer
Well,
reviewed
some of it
content,
is. Yes,
academic? Okay.
it's all peer reviewed, but I have to interrupt you. We
Okay.
publish about 350, 400 books a year.
Hmm.
Many of those, dozens are every year, are intended for general readers, because part of our
Hmm.
mission is to translate cutting edge research for society, for its impact on the
Hmm.
world. And there's more and more, popular interest in the sort of things that we do. But you're right. The majority of what we're publishing is more specialized.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when you say that basically all of us have this attention problem,
Yeah.
do you see that impacting the content that you publish as well? Do you see an impact on the uptake of that?
Yeah. We haven't done a formal, so this is more anecdotal. I've wanted to do an analysis of the page count, the average page count of the books that we publish.
Hmm.
Definitely more of an emphasis now on shorter books. So that's just,
Hmm.
one small data point. When we think about, what publishing broadly defined means of getting information out into the world, we think of multiple channels, just like everybody else. We're always thinking of audio because some people consume information that way. We've had experience also on the video side of things as well, and I can talk about that. We're constantly making sure that short forms of kind of longer books get out into the world in different forms of syndication. We're publishing multiple versions and different ways of things that we publish. So we're trying to do the same thing that we've been doing for many years. We're trying to adjust to people's different, information consumption styles. What I meant about attention is just that all of us have so much more coming at us. Even if you were to put, the phenomenon around social media to one side, that's a different conversation. If you just think about the various forms of entertainment, the many podcasts that you and I both want to listen to, the other things that we do. I, of course, believe full-heartedly in the book and the power of the book, both as a form of kind of self-expression, and the act of kind of writing long form is not something that can be replaced by other forms of communication. If you want to explain something, it's almost like downloading a part of your brain for consumption by a whole host of readers, right? And you can't necessarily do that in a soundbite. But I would hypothesize, it's too soon, I would hypothesize that what we're seeing now across the publishing industry, whether it's academic or not academic, in terms of just the markets and the sales, reflects something different from economic conditions. I think it really reflects people's reading behavior and information consumption behavior.
Most definitely. One of our previous guests was Dr. Ann Mangen, and she's from Stavanger University in Norway. And she's a reading professor. And she's a big advocate of books. And her point was, a book is an invention in and of itself, right? People think of it as this archaic remnant of, we didn't have anything better, so we went with a book. She said, no, that's not how you should look at a book. A book is a carefully crafted invention.
That's right.
Of centuries of, interpretation and kind of things that are in there. There's a reason why it is as it is, and there's a reason why it continues to exist and continues to thrive. So, instead of trying to digitize everything and trying to kind of, absorb knowledge only digitally, let's just respect the book for what it is and kind of empower it on that specific level, rather than just, many people trying, we don't need books, we don't need print. It's kind of, this war against print. She said, that's nonsense, because a book is an invention in of itself. And that just gave me also an insight. And I said, yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
She did extensive research on how knowledge is absorbed. And she said, she did studies whereby people, when they absorb knowledge from a book versus digitally, then from a book, it just stays better with you. And I won't get into detail about that because this is your interview, not Dr.
No. I'm glad
it is a fascinating study. It's a fascinating study. And I was really kind of blown away by, just that observation. A book is an invention in and of itself. Let it be that. Let it exist.
Yeah. And I mean, there's an expression, a quote that I often use is the book is the greatest man-made machine of all, not the TV, not the smart car, not the telephone, whatever. And in many ways, when you think about its impact on the world, it has been. And, the readers are still there. It's just, as I said, we all have many more demands on our attention now.
Yeah.
I, for one, I'll tell you that I never used to be a television watcher. And like a lot of people, being home during the pandemic, was like, okay, this is something I should try, and now there are series that I binge watch. I like to
Which one?
the latest one I just watched, which was just fabulous, was The Diplomat on Netflix
Oh
with
yeah,
Kerry Russell. So
seen it.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so good. And because I do, I'm always very busy. I have so much going on. I love audiobooks. I love the fact that I can be driving or doing the dishes and, listening to a book. And I also love just the added dimension of a good narrator.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. The voice can carry you away, and I love it particularly when the author is the narrator, because
Yes.
that just gives so much to it, because you hear firsthand of how they meant it, right? Because
Me too.
their voice goes there. Yeah.
I'm listening right now to Abraham Verghese's The Covenant of Water.
Oh
It's
yeah,
just
yeah,
brilliant. I mean, he's
yeah.
just an amazing writer. Yeah.
Nice,
And he does
nice.
the narration, of course.
High on my
Yeah.
list as well. But we're not going to talk about that. We're going to
Okay.
dive into your challenges, because
Okay.
otherwise we will talk for hours,
I
Amy, and we
know.
won't
It's
get to
fun.
your challenges. So, as your first challenge throughout your career, you've written down gender bias.
Yeah. I think that this is something that I came to, I think, later in life, realizing that a lot of my experiences, through my education, through my professional, journey, were impacted by the fact that we still very much live in Western society, in a kind of patriarchal world. I think women, I mean, things have obviously changed for the better, but you get used to being underestimated. You have to learn sometimes that the way somebody might respond to you doesn't have to do with the quality of your thoughts, but it may be because they're not even aware, that they tend to believe that a woman wouldn't be able to do this. And it kind of came to a head for me when I was in grad school, and, MIT in the 1980s, had something like, I think it was maybe, I want to use the number of like 180 of the tenured female faculty were women out of like over 1,000, and the number of graduate students was fairly female graduate students was low. If you were walking across the MIT campus, for every woman's bathroom, you would encounter 5 men's bathrooms, that kind of thing. And I became aware of my gender in a way that I hadn't been before. And I, had, after I decided, I didn't realize that I don't think I realized at the time that my decision to leave academia, where I think I could have been quite successful, had to do with the self-doubt that had, mounted in me over time. But when I found my way to Harvard University, initially I went there to help launch the Office for Scholarly Communication and help Harvard University implement its open access repository.
Mm-hmm.
But I then ended up in a new position as assistant provost for faculty diversity and
Mm-hmm.
development. And part of what I was working on was how to put structures, promotional structures, policies in place that help retain women in the academy. And so I spent a lot of my time learning about the reasons that women, more often women in science, but in other fields as well, feel like academia, was not a welcoming profession for them and not a welcoming career. And I won't talk about all the reasons for that. I can direct you to some good resources. But there was this great moment in which I realized, like, okay, I'm learning about gender and women in science, and I have all these skill sets in publishing and technical standards and things like that. And we have this great opportunity in how we represent authorship, right? Because if you're an academic, your progression through the field, how you get promoted, how you get tenured, has a lot to do with your publication record. To give people tools to talk about their contributions in a much richer way, right? And so, I had worked on Crossref, and then I worked at Harvard on something called ORCID, the launch of ORCID, which is a an identifier for a unique identifier for researchers. And in the course of that work, realized we could actually create a system to allow people to signal in a standard way that not just were they, third author on a paper, that they actually contributed the statistical analysis, or they contributed the experimental protocol, or any of a number. It ended up being 14 roles. And so I became very interested in ways of representing credit that, address issues of bias and the way in which, I'd heard from so many women that they felt like are just formal systems of attribution and credit were preventing them from being recognized for what they'd actually done. Yeah. Right.
Do and then
go ahead.
Do you feel it has improved? Do you feel
I definitely do. I do. But it, that interest in how do we create more equitable access to professions, and how do we create more equitable systems of talking about, excellence in the production of new knowledge. That also ultimately led to my being, when I got back to MIT and started focusing on publishing as many books by and about women in science, or women in STEM more generally, led to my originating and then producing a film on women in science that was hugely impactful. And so,
this is Picture a Scientist.
That is Picture a Scientist.
Yeah. And
so, I can see now, again, in hindsight, how all of these things connect. My own personal experience, my sense of kind of pain, if you will, certainly challenge in deciding to leave academia, like somehow I wasn't good enough, finding my way back to working within, the university on, creative solutions of different kinds, to being able to tell a story about gender and science. And so, I think those challenges, the adversity that we face, early in life, definitely shapes us.
Yeah. There's something profoundly wrong, I think, with that academia is so difficult to thrive in. Because I have so many friends who just like you have a magnificent brain, and they're ready and able to kind of, if they could, devote their life to science. But then because of the funding and, because of all these very, how should I put it, very kind of basic things that aren't provided, that aren't there. And it's often around the funding, I can imagine. People just break their careers and dive into something else. And I think in your case, you managed to find something very fulfilling, and of course, you were working in an extension of what you were already working in. But I also hear so many stories of people saying, you know what, I've got a PhD, I'm going to do something completely different. And I'm like, well, that is not that's not what you thought when you started your PhD, but there are too many obstacles, too many practical obstacles were on your path for you not to pursue something. And that's just a waste, because we need bright minds to kind of, for this world to evolve. Sorry, this is just a general rant.
I couldn't agree with you more. Absolutely, to agree with everything that you said. I mean, people get drawn to research in science and other fields out of deep curiosity, and what a wonderful state of mind, almost a joyful state of mind that is, to sort of say like, wow, I want to understand how this works or that works, and I want to research it. I think it's funding, as you said. There are people who end up much happier doing research in a corporate setting because they don't have to worry about the funding in the same way. Yeah. But I also think it's because it's a profession that relies so much on having mentors and champions, and it's a little bit in science in particular, like an apprenticeship system. And that also can lead to kind of built-in cronyism or bias, if you think about it, right? Like if all along you're applying for that grant, you're getting that promotion, you're getting that, article published in the right journal, all depends on a form of peer review that in and of itself has this kind of entrenched cronyism, for lack of a better word, and doesn't have protections of fairness built into it. Yeah, that's something that we're working on a lot now too.
Yeah. Just going back to Picture a Scientist, it was very well received. You were at the Tribeca Film Festival. First of all, where can people see it if they're interested? Is it available
Yeah.
somewhere?
Well, just a little bit of a sad story. So it was selected in 2020 for the Tribeca Film Festival, which is a big deal for a
Sure.
documentary, and then COVID. So we were
Oh my
getting
goodness.
we were all set. It was my middle kid was in her junior year at Columbia, New York, and she was off in a semester in Rome. And we were going to go visit her that April and then come back in time to go to the opening at Tribeca. Of course, when you think about what happened with the pandemic, my daughter had to come back from Italy in March, and then the Tribeca Film Festival was canceled. But there was this sort of silver lining in what happened. So rather than a theatrical release for the film, it immediately went on to public television. It ended
Oh,
up having all of these screenings, I think over in the last few years, over 1,000 around the world, many of them that had discussion panels associated with them. And then it ended up on Netflix. So it's available on Netflix for
oh
anybody who
wow.
wants to see it. And it was this year, it was nominated actually for an Emmy Award. So we were a finalist in
Get
a,
Out.
yes,
Amazing. Yeah.
science documentary. And, I should also be very careful to say that all of the credit goes to the incredible film directors that I worked with, Sharon Shattuck and Ian Chaney, these young directors who came in and, I had the idea for it, but in the end, I'm not a filmmaker myself. So, yeah,
Wow. I mean, did you expect such an impact when
I
you
did
when you
not.
started the journey? Yeah. Yeah.
Not at
So,
all. No,
yeah.
it was kind of accidental. So maybe
Yeah.
there's a good life lesson in that too, right? That
Yeah.
if you're passionate about something and you pursue that passion and you feel like, you know, here's an opportunity to do something that I don't know how to do, just do it anyway,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It,
That's the way how I do it, and I'm not always happy with that choice. I'll be honest, because if it rains, it pours, and then you're like,
yes.
oh, why did I have to do this, or why did I have to be this entrepreneur, and it's not going the way I wanted to go. But
Yeah.
then at the end of the day, when you look back at certain things, you do have a very fulfilling feeling, like right? and,
Yeah.
and it doesn't, I mean, an Emmy award is crazy, right? Emmy award nomination, it's of course crazy. I mean, it doesn't have to be that big, but in my case is the fact that having an impact on now
Yes.
tens of thousands of teachers and educators and students all over the world, right? That's starting to add up, right? So just that idea of dissemination, that people are listening, and that it influences, and that someone is helped by something, that's already something that
Yeah.
that can keep me going, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. I mean, and again, when we spoke earlier about that reset after the
Yeah.
pandemic, that's
Well,
that's
and well,
that's
the
just
other
something that keeps you going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other lesson here too is timing, right? So
Yeah.
we started working on this project having nothing to do with the Me Too hashtag Me Too moment.
Mhm.
But when the film was in production and finishing up, it was in that climate, and so people were very interested in questions around women's experience in the workplace. So
Yeah.
so that was lucky. And I would say anybody now working in the fields of genomics, as you said you are, and
Yeah.
biotechnology and artificial intelligence, it is a moment,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Definitely.
So,
Well, I'm going to check it out, Picture Scientist, but we're going to go to your second challenge.
okay.
And you write here as a challenge, and I think this is a very original one, your own personality.
Yeah.
So how is that a challenge?
Since I was a little kid, I have been painfully shy. I remember, being 4 or 5 and hiding behind my mother's coat, if people would come over to the house, being in the classroom as a little kid and never wanting to raise my hand. I mean, that kind of thing. And that, a lot of people, it's just I think it's a personality trait. It may be something that you're born with. I mean, other people could argue that it's, some sort of inherited trauma or something. I don't know, but I just was a shy person. And so I've spent a lot of my life kind of running up against this wall of, that was another factor in my deciding that an academic career wasn't right for me, because standing up in front of a classroom and teaching as I did took so much out of me. I think universities are better now for graduate students, that they're preparing to teach, that they have all kinds of programs, to help them get ready to teach. But when I was in grad school, that wasn't the case. So there's that. And then, interestingly enough, given what's happened in my career, I'm invited. Hi, how are you? So cute.
So we just have my 4-year-old daughter coming in.
So
Who doesn't know
adorable.
that we're recording. So go ahead.
Hi. Well, you're welcome to join the
She
conversation.
just came out of school, eh?
Oh, okay.
So, continue, Amy. I'm so sorry.
No,
She's going to join in full.
It's so adorable. So as I was saying, I have had to, the kind of shyness that makes, public speaking hard. I have to put a lot of work into it. And then thinking that, okay, well, I'm not teaching. What ends up happening, for me professionally is very, very frequent opportunities to speak and lecture. Yeah. And of course, I run a company that, has over 100 staff, and I meet and lead meetings with over 100 people, many times a month. So it's something that I've had to work at. But I think that the fact that it didn't come easily to me means that, I put the work into it that produces the quality that I want. Yeah. I can never be offhand about it. I can't stand up. And it's funny, earlier this year, I decided to start taking improv classes, like improv stand-up classes. And it's been a great experience.
This is amazing. And you're talking to an absolute extrovert. And the reason why I can say convincingly that I'm an extrovert is because when you say these things, and you're not the first one who says this, you're describing the features of someone who is, I think, naturally introverted, that really needs to make an effort to go to the outside world or to do speaking. But from my end, is you're so good at it. So I'm like, how can you be an introvert, right? So I'm really puzzled by by that idea. But so my question would be, and you revealed a small part of your secret, which is you push yourself. So for instance, if you have a public talk, if you know you're going to have a public talk, what goes through your mind like before that? So there's a reluctance, there's a resistance before you have such an event.
I can't make the decisions lightly. Okay. And my process is very time consuming. So what I mean that I can't just talk off the cuff. If I have, I had one keynote a couple of months ago, I have another keynote in my profession next month. I will, for example, have to write out the whole talk in advance and then go from knowing what I want to say for 45 minutes or half an hour, then take that back to slides and either, use notes and practice so that it doesn't sound like I'm reading, or in some cases there are, the digital kind of cue cards. But yeah, that's what I have to do. And so what it means is the fact that I don't take it lightly means that I am told they're often very good because I put a lot of work into them.
Yeah. Do you then also feel that you did good? Like once it's done, do you then feel like satisfied, sometimes, or are you still unhappy?
Yeah, okay. Sometimes I do. Yeah, sometimes, especially now that I'm older, I would say there were many years in which I always had that sort of grain of self-doubt that I did this and it was not good enough. Mm-hmm. So that's the shyness is one part of my personality. And the other part of my personality, which has been, sometimes gets me in trouble, is I've always been incredibly impatient. Like if I want to do something, I want to do it now. If I see a problem and I want it to be solved, I want it done right away. And, if you're working on something complex, if you're collaborating with other people, you often can't control that. So learning how to, especially kind of running a company, get people to do their best work, understand what they're capable of and what schedules they're capable of. I'm sure my staff would complain about, like, why is she emailing me at 4 a.m? Why can't this wait? That kind of thing. So,
what's the trick to pacing yourself there? Or is there none?
It's funny. Just as soon as you ask that question, I think the fact that I am so eager a lot of the time, or kind of on overdrive, is one of the reasons why I often have many balls in the air. I have many things going on, because if I can't be chewing on one bone that I want to be making progress on, then there's always something else. So I just am pushing lots of things forward.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I recognize the impatience,
Yeah.
contrary to the being an introvert, which does not bother me. I am impatient as well. My trick is always telling people that I am. So it's like,
Yeah.
you know, I'm going to annoy you because I want things yesterday. That's what I
Yeah.
tell people. And I tell them in advance in a kind of, you know, in an informal setup that that's the way I work. Because
Yeah.
otherwise I don't, you know, because I don't do it to antagonize people. I really don't, you know. I just am also a person that would email you at 4 a.m. Not that I expect an answer at 4 a.m., but I do
Right.
want, you know,
Exactly.
but I do tell people, it's like, listen, this is just how I work because I need to get it out of my own system,
Right.
right?
That's a good
That's
idea.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So just sharing that, you know, I don't necessarily see it as a disadvantage, you know, a personal
Mhm.
disadvantageous character trait, but I do know that not everyone works
Mhm.
or thinks the same, right? So
Yeah, no, it's true, and it's good
yeah,
to be open about it. Here's another
yeah,
one that I'm curious what you'll think about, or maybe have some wisdom about, is that I tend to be a very trusting person, like almost to the point of gullibility. And I have
mm,
often, in the business world, or really in any kind of world where there's power politics, I get tripped up because I don't expect the people that I'm negotiating with or working with to be anything other than direct or honest.
mm,
And only later do I realize, like, oh, okay, there were some mind games there,
yeah,
so yeah, but that's part of my personality. So
yeah. You've worked with the British as well, because I would say, like, I can never read the British. You know, being Dutch Belgian, we have the tendency to be very direct.
yeah.
And there's this book called The Cultural Map, which is it's just so funny.
Oh,
It was also
okay.
on a
I'll look for
podcast.
that.
The author was also interviewed on a podcast, and she also shared like how certain people are very direct, and then basically you know, in some cultures it can be considered very offensive if you are direct, but actually the reason why people are direct in some cases is because they want to be treated also in a very direct manner, right? They
Yeah.
won't take criticism if you are direct to them. And I know that in British culture, it's very kind of can be seen as very inappropriate if you are direct.
Yes.
It's like they excel in, you
Yes.
know, going in circles endlessly and being so polite and whatever. And at the end of the day, you don't know what they, you know,
Right.
actually mean. I think
Yeah.
if you ask my advice, what I do is I had to teach myself not to respond directly
Mm.
and to think it through, because you know my best decisions, you know, I mean there is some intuitive, you know, I make some decisions intuitively, but my I think my best decisions is if I take things home with me, because also because of my impatient personality,
Mhm.
I want to decide quick, but sometimes I realize like this is too complex and I might be overlooking certain things, or I might be not understanding the people the
Mm.
way I should understand them. So let me take this home and let me look at it again. If that is something you can do, also ask other people to weigh in. And
Mhm.
then the outcome is often a lot more outweighed and slightly more considerate as to what your answer will be, rather than just, uh, shooting off the cuff. Is that a word? Like, you know,
Yeah.
going right
Off the
away
cuff.
and then saying, you know,
Yes.
yeah, right away saying yes or no. Even though, you know, I have a tendency to do that as well. It's like I want it quick, I want it now,
Mhm.
and whatever. But often it's like, no, take it back with you, think it
Yes.
over, and then get back to the people you need to get.
Right.
I don't
Yeah.
know if that works. Yeah,
No,
but
no, no. It's
yeah,
it's there's definitely wisdom and value in that for sure.
yeah, yeah.
So
Happy I could help, Amy.
okay.
um, and then your first of all your personality. You mentioned you're an introvert and you're impatient. Is there anything else when you say
Well,
that you
just
need to get out of
yeah,
your own way? Yeah.
yeah. No, just as I said that I mean, I guess in both of those things I talked about the life lessons and how they lead to you know being productive and doing good work. I think what I was going to say about being direct and being trusting, I think what I've learned is okay, sometimes if you're not expecting the person that you're talking to or negotiating with to be something different, you're not expecting them to be trying to manipulate something or not being direct. And it can be harmful or painful to understand that someone might not be behaving in the most honest way, for example. I think what I've come through and realized, especially because I have been somewhat successful in my chosen field, is that it still pays to be completely honest and direct. I mean, I'm not contradicting what you said about stopping and pausing, because what I've seen is that if you are kind of authentic and you are recognized as someone who can be trusted to speak their mind and speak honestly, and, you know, not necessarily bare their full soul or the expression of like bring your whole self to work, right? But just be really honest and upfront. That kind of reputation for trustworthiness and authenticity can carry you very far.
Mm-hmm.
So even though I've sometimes felt like, oh, I wish I was more Machiavellian and you know, maybe I'd be a CEO of a big company, right? I actually, but it's a, you know, it's not Simon and Schuster, you know, but in the end, I do feel like as I've gotten to know people who are at very senior positions in their careers, one of the things that I've noticed is a lot of them are just very authentic and easygoing and direct, and don't have a hard time, you know, talking about their own shortcomings. They're not putting on a show. And so I think that's really important for younger people to understand. And I say this to my kids too, is that, you know, we start out in our professional lives thinking there's a code of behavior. There's a way I have to behave. There's a way I have to dress. There's a way I have to talk. And then you reach a certain level and you realize like people are just themselves and it's fine. And that is the way that, you know, that not only, you know, will you be happier in whatever you choose to do, but it's also the way that you will succeed.
Yeah. I hear what you're saying, and I agree 100%. I think it's also maturing and becoming more confident with who you are and what you can do. You mentioned earlier your skill sets, you know, your talents, but also things that, you know, where there's room for improvement, right?
Yeah.
I think when I was younger, I was trying to do it all. I felt I needed to be, because I did like a business degree after graduating in history. And then when I did my business degree, I felt like I need to excel as an accountant. Well, that's never going to happen because I just, I don't have that affinity with numbers the way that someone else has it. I need to understand it, right? But I don't need to do everything. I think when you're younger, you think I need to be able to do it all because that is what brings me success. And that's so draining. That's so tiresome. I think if you're authentic, you can say, here's what I'm good at. Here's what I'm going for. And here's where I need help. And you're open about asking that help, right? And I think that makes a good CEO. That makes a good leader who can say, like, listen, I'm not perfect, right? But we're in the same boat and let's do this together, right? And another thing is, at least that I've learned, is that when you are kind of asked to head up something, it's basically it's a service that you provide to everyone that you've been asked to be the spokesperson for. You are servicing them, not the other way around, right? So it's kind of like you need to make sure that whoever is working with you can do whatever they want to do to make, to achieve the same end goal. So it's kind of like it comes from a certain kind of, understanding, a certain groundedness, right? Some people call it humility. I think that's a bit too far, but certain groundedness, like, guys, here's what we need to do. Here's what we need to, what we need to achieve. And how can I get everyone to understand it and everyone to be motivated and excited by, what we need to do together? That doesn't come from a place from, I'm perfect, right? So it's kind of, it comes from, that's authenticity, that you can say like, can someone help me with this? Because then we achieve things together.
I once, it was about 5 years ago, it was definitely pre-pandemic, I wrote a blog post about, how leadership is not charisma. Leadership is hard work. It's not about being a charismatic person. And I do think a lot of young people, based on, what they might see in the media, social media, whatever, television, they just sort of think that you get to the top by behaving and looking a certain way. It's just not true.
Yeah. No, I mean, and I think that's all fake it till you make it behavior, right? People, they think like, if I behave that way, then that's how it is, but they don't get to the essence of what it is. And, we mentioned earlier, social media and kind of, people losing attention. That isn't helping in that respect either, because it's all kind of people showing a mosaic of what they think it should look like, it doesn't hit the essence of what it is. So
Yeah.
yeah, again, that's another discussion.
Yes, a whole other
But a
conversation.
very interesting one. And I like what you
Yeah.
said about authenticity, and I agree with you, right? That's
Yeah,
and it takes guts to be authentic as well,
it does.
because you do need to acknowledge, the things that
Mm,
you cannot do well. And
that's right.
sometimes that's, yeah. um your last challenge, Amy: power structures in general, and
Yeah.
then the theory of change.
What I meant by that was that if we think, we live in a world that has many pressing challenges, and in any domain in which we work, we want to think that, we're building creative solutions, we're making the world better, we're solving problems. You get invested in making progress towards those solutions in your work. And I'm often very struck by, and this speaks to some extent to academia, but I'm sure it's true elsewhere, this conception people have of what an acceptable process looks like,
Yeah.
that, okay, well, in any kind of problem that you're trying to solve, or a solution that you're trying to come to, I often feel like things that are process heavy, that come from certain institutional norms, often take longer and don't necessarily lead to a better outcome. I think
Mhm.
one of the things that I've learned about change and making progress is that it's sometimes better to work from lots of uncertainty, uncertain information, being able to function within that uncertainty, you know, use your best facilities to make a decision to go in one direction, and then quickly learn whether it was the right or wrong direction. If it's wrong, pivot. You often get where you want to go faster rather than saying, I'm going to sit back and do this in a very process heavy way, collect all
Yeah.
the information and be sure.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I meant. I see this, people have different personalities, from everything like, choosing what restaurant they're going to go to. But you see it often in the workplace as well.
Yeah.
And I've really come to believe that, if there's urgency about something, it's okay to throw that kind of formal process out the
Yeah.
window. So, and then, by the same token, I would say that a lot of the change that often needs to happen is, it's much more ground up than top down. So in the space that I work in, right, if you're, where we started, talking about academic publishing and trying to transition from kind of old models towards more open knowledge and more open models, so much of what I see in the space, written and spoken, is about everything that's wrong with the big commercial models and all the things that we have to tear down, and much less energy and time spent in talking about and building, what's the alternative? What are we going to go
Mhm.
to? How do we build the things that are the bridge to the future that we want?
Yeah.
And yet that is often so much more powerful. And it's really where I try to invest my time. I get a little bit impatient with, things that I think are, so I've really talked about two things, process heavy and kind of evangelistic as opposed to doing the work. But
Yeah. You're getting impatient with impatience.
yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, no, no, 100%. I won't go into detail around this because I appreciate your time, but I do think you're 100% right. One rebuttal I would give is like it. Sometimes it feels that process focused behavior and thinking is not always rewarded in our
Yeah.
society of today. It's like almost like, no, no, get to the essence, get there quick. And that might go at the expense of people who think detail and process entered. And those people should be nurtured as well. And that should be appreciated
Mm.
within every organization and on
Yes.
every single level. So that should be protected. And all our
Mm.
fast paced thinking and kind of,
Oh,
wanting things
sure.
quick
I
should
mean,
not
it's
be,
a matter
yeah,
of
right.
it's a matter of balance. I mean, a great
Yeah.
example of what you're talking about now. I mean, what happened, to go back to generative AI, is, everybody was so excited when, these chatbots were released to the public and they had access, and then the following week they're all saying like, you know, what the hell? Where's all the political regulation we need around this?
Yeah.
Why didn't anybody think about whether it's safe to release this to the public? Why didn't anybody think about the downstream consequences? Because there was a race between large commercial entities to lead in these models. And so you're right, the kind of the process, the thinking, especially planning around downstream consequences. So I'm not disagreeing with that at all. I'm just saying that sometimes our institutions are optimized around process in a way that's counterproductive to what they really want to be achieving. So that's what I mean.
No, sorry, you said it the other way around. I thought because we were working with impatience and whatever. You're also right. Sometimes processes are archaic and they're not with the times anymore, specifically if things need to change quickly. And then, we should also look at that. But it's a difficult area, I think, specifically if you're dealing with big organizations and people who have jobs because of a process that's redundant, right? So what are you going to do then, or stuff like that? Anyways, let's not go any further because I know you need to go. I do have a very, very last question.
Okay.
I normally ask a question around reading, but you've already given the answer. You said The Covenant of Water by Abraham Verghese. Is there any other book that you would say, like, guys, you need to read that one, like that you would like to recommend to our audience?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I love the writer Ian McEwan. So anything that he writes, I think, is some of the most brilliant sentence construction that I've seen. So I would highly recommend that and his last book, Lessons. He's become more controversial, but fabulous writer. The book that I was going to mention was a book called Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt. Is an absolutely brilliant book about the relationship between human beings and non-human creatures. In this case, an octopus in an aquarium. And it's fiction, but it's just a beautiful story about humanity and connection. I loved it. That was
Bright Creatures. And who's the author? We'll add it in our show notes.
Shelby Van Pelt.
Shelby Van Pelt.
Yeah.
Wonderful recommendation. I'm going to read it. That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Amy. And then very, very last question ever, I promise. Now it's the Amy Brand podcast. It's not Messy and Masterful. It's your podcast. Who would you want to interview?
Who would I want to interview?
Yeah.
Wow. One of the things that I love about what I do is that I get to work with so many smart, fascinating people. Since you asked, I probably would want to have a re-encounter and a conversation with Noam Chomsky, who I mentioned earlier. I was fortunate enough a few years back to be able... We hosted a 90th birthday party for him at MIT, and I got to say some comments because I had been his student and also his editor at the MIT Press. But I've been following what he's saying about generative AI. I'm always interested in his analysis of global politics. He's just someone that I revere, and I would love to have a chance to interview him in depth again. So wonderful recommendation, and I think there are many people who would want to talk to him as well. But that's a wonderful recommendation. I hope it'll work out that you will manage. But for the time being, Amy, thank you so very much for doing this interview. It's been an absolute pleasure, for inspiring us all as the director of MIT Press. We'll add to our show notes all the beautiful things you said, from Picture Scientist to the book, to the books you recommended. Thank you so much, My
Dr.
pleasure.
Amy Brand.
My pleasure. It's so good to see you, and I really enjoyed this.
If you liked this episode of the Teach Pitch podcast, then it would mean the absolute world if you could share it with your friends and or give it a short review on your preferred podcast platform. The more you share your ideas about these interviews, the more people will find out about them. So do let us know what you think. We'd be very, very grateful.
Special thanks to Philip Anderson for our beautiful theme music. This podcast was produced and edited by Natalie Piles, project coordination by Inva Saini, and production assistance by Genta Metalia.